All right. Hey, everybody. How you doing today? I'm Dan from ON1. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give it a couple minutes here to make sure everybody signs in. We're starting right on the dot at 10 o'clock. So today's session is a recorded webinar, so you'll be able to watch it again in the future, especially if you miss any tips that we zip by. Today, we're really going to be focusing on what is new in ON1 Photo RAW 2019, which just became available for all of you guys on Tuesday. Now, I understand there's probably a few of you in the audience who aren't familiar with it. I'll kind of cover what it is at the very beginning of my presentation, but then we're really going to focus mostly on the new features, and we're going to have lots of time for asking questions. So if you have questions, you're going to submit those. If you've logged into the webinar, there's a Q&A panel. You can submit your questions there, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can just comment right there on the video on Facebook Live. And our friend Michael is helping us out with that. Say hello to all the nice people, Michael. Michael, this is mostly an audio test. Well, hopefully he will figure that out, or we won't be able to ask too many questions. All right, so let's get going here. Let me share my screen with you guys. All right, so as I mentioned, Photo RAW 2019 is brand new. It just came out. Now, a lot of you guys might be Plus Pro customers or beta testers, so you've had it for a few weeks and have had a chance to play with it, but a lot of you haven't seen it yet at all. So before we jump into what's new, let me just explain what it is. So Photo RAW is going to help you to find and manage your photos. It's going to let you edit them. It's going to let you enhance them and share and print them all within the same application. It's really a whole new workflow for folks. And it does that by having the simplicity of a browser, the power of a RAW processor, the professional effects engine, all in a new layered and non-destructive workflow that you can own instead of rent. Now, let's jump in. I'm going to show you some of the new stuff in Photo RAW. Let me get rid of some of this other stuff on my screen so I have some room to work here. It's a recorded session. If you don't get to watch it right now, you can always watch it again later. And if you have questions, you're going to do that through the webinar Q&A panel, which will be located in your Zoom window. So you can type questions in there. Michael and the gang will be able to ask those questions to me. We'll be able to answer them for everybody. Now, I kind of went through and told you kind of what Photo RAW is. It's a single application that lets you do your browsing, your managing, your editing, all in a layered, non-destructive workflow. Let's jump in and look at the new stuff inside of Photo RAW 2019. So first off, you'll notice it looks quite a bit different. If you're a previous owner, you're looking at the user interface, you'll see that we've gone to less lines. We've gone to a new font that's easier to read. We've also changed the accent color to a nice blue color. You can change that accent color if you didn't know. If you go up to your preferences, and on the first tab, there's an accent color option. So you have a range of accent colors, either a vivid color or a more pastel version that you can select. When you change those colors, just be sure you relaunch the application. Some of the other cool things that have changed in here is there are now keyboard shortcuts for switching modules. Hooray, says everybody. So now if you want to go to the edit module, you can just hit the D key on your keyboard and it'll take that photo there. You can hit the G key and the G key will take you back to browse. You can see what those keyboard shortcuts are easily. Just right click on a photo and browse and you can see those keyboard shortcuts for the modules right here. So it makes it a lot easier to navigate around through your photos. Another thing you might notice is the scroll bars are a little bit thinner than they used to be. We're trying to give everybody as much real estate as they can. Now, I've heard since we've launched from users that they might be a little too thin for them. So we're working on a way to make those bigger, but still give you more space. That'll be coming in a future version. I'll remind you that you can always scroll with the scroll bar on your mouse, or if you're using a trackpad, you can just use two fingers together and you can scroll up or down any of those views that have scroll bars just like that. So that makes it a little easier to get around. Let's see, what other new stuff is in here? You can now add color labels to folders. I find this super handy because now you can actually set kind of the status for a folder. Let's say you come back from a shoot and you haven't had a chance to edit it, you could assign a color label to a folder. For example, if I come down here, I'm gonna go to some of my personal photos, I'm gonna go to my inbox. These are photos I haven't done much with yet. I could simply right click on one of these folders and I can set a color label for it. So I could say all of my folders that are labeled red are the ones that I've downloaded but I haven't edited yet. And all the ones that are yellow are the ones that I've done my first round edits on and I want to go back and pick out my favorites to do retouching on. You can kind of set your own workflow for what those colors mean, but it's a really handy way to keep track of individual events or jobs or for your clients just by adding those color labels to the folders. Pretty handy. Now, another thing I wanted to show you guys, let me just grab a photo here and I'm going to jump over to the edit module. We'll talk a lot about that here in a second. You'll notice that on the right-hand side, the tool well looks quite a bit different. there's, rather than having dedicated buttons for develop and effects, there's now a single edit button. And we take all of the stuff that you would do for the kind of the raw processing and pixel-based editing, and we combine that together under that edit button. Same thing with layers. We'll talk about layers a lot. The reason I wanted to jump over here first was actually to show you the tools have changed a little bit. This is an important UI change. Because people work on much smaller screens than they have in the past, there's a lot of Windows laptops where the display is quite small. We needed to group the tools together so there would actually be enough room for all of them. On a small display, we run out of room. So we took the tools that are related to each other, we grouped them together. So for example, if I needed to do some retouching, I click on the Fix tool. And for the Fix tool at the top, you'll see you still have the different modes of that tool. There's the perfect eraser. There's the, hang on, this little guy's in my way. There's the retouch brush and the clone stamp. Those still respond to the same keyboard shortcuts. And you'll also notice that over here in the tool well, it shows you what your current tool is for that. So if I wanted the retouch brush, I can just hit the R key on my keyboard. It'll pick the retouch brush and I'll see the retouch brush over in the tool well. And that goes with a lot of the other tools. Same with the local adjustment tools. So the local adjustment brush and the local adjustment gradient work the same way. The masking tools and the refine tools for refining, blurring, and chiseling your masks, those are all grouped together like that. All right, let's see. What other goodies do we have in the UI before we jump into other things? You can, let me bop back over to browse here real fast. You can also remove these labels. It'll make the bumpers on the left and right a little bit thinner if you want to. You can go up to your window menu and you can turn off show bumper labels. And this will actually hide those little bumpers, makes them a little thinner on the labels, so it gives you even more real estate. I like to keep those on. I'm going to turn it back on there. And I think that is about it on the big UI changes. Let's actually jump into what is arguably the most important new feature, and that is layers. So I'm just going to pick a photo here. I'm going to go down to one of my albums that I've created. And let's grab a photo we want to work on. I'm going to use this one for today's example. I'm going to take this raw photo, and I'm going to click on Edit. Now when it opens up in Edit, right here on the right-hand side, you'll see, let me close up the navigator so we have a little bit more room to work with here. You'll see a layers section right here. Every photo you open up has the bottom as kind of the base layer. So even a raw photo, the bottom of it is a base layer. You can move it and mask it and change its blending mode just like you would in any layered file. Now, if you're scared by layers, you don't need to work in layers. You can hide that entire section if you want to. You can go up to the window menu and you can say, turn off that show layer section. We'll just hide it. You won't see it unless you're working on a multi-layered file to start with. I'm going to leave that on though for today's demonstration. Then below that, you'll see tabs for Develop, Effects, Portrait, and the Local Adjustments. Portrait is brand new. That actually brings back the capabilities of finding faces and automatically smoothing skin, detecting eyes and mouth, and retouching those. And we'll show you how to do that here in a couple minutes as well. For this one, what I want to do is I want to show you how on each individual layer that you create, as you merge different photos together, they can each have their full non-destructive editing settings. It's pretty amazing. You can now actually take real raw files, combine them together into a layered photo that has the raw data all the way back to the very beginning. You can change your raw processing settings at any time. All right, so let's jump in here. I'm going to close up my preset drawer, give us a little bit more room, and I want to actually convert this photo to a black and white, and I want to remove that boring blue sky and put in a much more dramatic sky behind it. So I'm going to start off with my masking tools. I'm going to grab the masking brush. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here and turn my feather down a little bit. And I'm going to make sure it's set to paint out and 100% opacity. I just want to start to get rid of that big background in here. So you'll notice I'm just going to paint through the biggest area of the sky. I'm going to stop just shy of the building here. I always need some background music for this part. This is where Michael should beatbox for us, I think, while I'm masking. All right. Now, when I get to the edge, I'm going to turn on the perfect brush option. So we're going to turn that on by clicking right here on the little perfect brush option. There's also a keyboard shortcut for that too. I think it's Command R or Control R if I remember. The cool thing about that perfect brush is it's going to paint away based on color. So now I can start to paint right along this edge and it's going to detect the edge and stop automatically. Look at that. Pretty sweet. I'm just going to zip through here. We're going to remove all of that blue along the edge. Let me make my brush a little bit bigger here so this goes a little faster. I'll just paint right along the edge. I got in a little too far on the building. I'm going to show you how to fix that. It happens to be the very similar blue to the sky. So I can easily just change my paintbrush to the paint in rather than the paint out mode. So I'm just going to switch to paint in. Let me zoom in here a little bit. I'm going to pan over to those areas and I'll just paint those little spots back in with a smaller brush where I got a little too close to the edge. Now, some of you guys who are previous customers are probably asking, why didn't you just use the Quick Mask tool for that? Well, we're rebuilding the Quick Mask tool for a non-destructive world right now, and you'll actually get that for free as part of a free update coming very soon, actually. The new tool is actually AI powered, so it does much better results in a fraction of the time of the old Quick Mask tool. We're really excited to get it in your hands. It's just not quite ready for showtime yet. Let me grab right along the edge here. I think I got a little bit along here that got masked out. I'm going to show you guys a handy little trick. Did you know you can draw a straight line with a brush if you click once and then hold the shift key and click again? It'll draw a straight line from point to point. So because this is architecture, it's got a nice straight edge. I'm just going to click once right here, and now I'll just scroll all the way down to the bottom to its outer edge right here. Now watch, I'm going to hold the shift key down, I click again, and voila, it painted that whole edge in with a nice straight line. All right, let's go back to our fit view here real quick so we can see the whole photo. So now we've isolated that building on a transparent background. This is a raw photo. We're still dealing with the actual CR2 Canon RAW file. Now I want to add another layer to it. So if you want to combine photos together, there's a couple different ways to do that. I'm going to use the plus button right here in the layer stack. I'm going to click on this. It's going to open up a built-in little miniature browser that we give you. So it's going to take you right to the folder where you were just browsing and browsing, where that photo lives. So you can see this is where the original photo lives. I could navigate to any folder on my computer. I could change drives if I needed to, or I could use any of the built-in extras or the extras that I've imported. The extras are things like backgrounds, borders, textures, things like that. I'm going to go over and I'm going to use one of the built-in backgrounds that we have. So I'm going to go to the Extras tab. I'm going to click on the ON1 Extras, and let's go to the Textures. And in here, there's a bunch of skies. So I'm going to come into the skies folder, and I'm looking for a really dramatic, dark, moody sky. So I'm going to scroll down here until I find one that I like. Here's a good one right there. I'll double click, and now that's going to be inserted as a layer into my photo right there. Now I can size it, move it, rotate it, put it in the order that I want. So I'm going to use the move tool right up here. You see how the transform handles appear on that layer. This lets me move it around, lets me position it. The easy thing to do on a photo like this is to actually just hit the fill canvas button right here, and ka-chow, it just automatically fills my canvas. I don't have to do any manual moving of it. I'm going to apply that, and now I'm just going to tuck it underneath my building. So in my layer stack, I can just click and drag it into the order that I want it to be, just like that. So now the sky is behind the building. Now, each of these are still independent layers. Each of those layers can have their own total non-destructive settings for it. So let's deal with the background first. I want to make it black and white. I don't want to make it look like it was a really long exposure. So I'm going to blur those clouds out. So I'm going to start off by going to the Effects tab, and I'm going to make it black and white to start. So I can add a black and white filter. So you can see it's taken that sky layer, it's pulled all the color out of it, and it's made it black and white. I can even adjust the color response. So this had some blue, and I want the blue to be darker. I can grab the blue slider, and I can darken those blues up in the sky a little bit. And now I want to blur it. I want to make it look like a long exposure. So I click the Add Filter button. You may notice there's a cool little new Add Filter dialog. It helps you pick out the filter that you want. There's over 25 filters in Effects now, and there's more coming all the time. So this will let you find them. There's a search field, so I can type in what I'm looking for, and that'll search the name or the keywords or the description for those. When I mouse over them, it gives me a little before and after preview and tells me a little bit about what the filter does. Tells me what kind of photos it will be good to be used on. So I'm going to go to blur in this case. I want to create a motion blur look. There we go. Now there's a bunch of different kinds of blurs. There's a normal Gaussian blur. I want to use a motion blur. So I'm going to grab the motion blur option. I'll grab the distance slider, and see as I pull this, it's going to change how much it blurs. I'm going to use a really heavy blur, like all the way at the max. The angle will let me change the angle. I actually want to keep the angle flat at 0, horizontal. And then the smoothing slider adds a little bit of regular blur on top of it. I'm going to turn that all the way down. So there we go. Now I've added this really dramatic long exposure sky behind my photo on its own layer. Now I'm going to go back to that raw photo. We'll make it black and white and make any adjustments to it that we want to as well. So let's go back to that raw photo. I can go to the Develop tab. There's all my raw processing settings. Now, when I open this photo, I didn't do anything, but I actually have all the full raw processing settings in here. I'm just going to hold down my J key on my keyboard here. I'm going to adjust my exposure slider down a little bit to make sure I preserve all my highlights. I'm going to adjust the blacks down to make sure I have a little bit of real black in the building. There we go. And then based on my own taste, I can now adjust the building to what I'd like. I'm going to bring the shadow slider up just a little bit here to bring up the shadows on that right-hand side. And then to make it black and white, I'll just click on the Effects tab. We will add a filter and select black and white. And voila, there we go. So we were able to combine a raw photo with another photo. In this case, it happened to be a JPEG, but it could be another raw photo. It could even be a copy of the exact same photo, or it could be another exposure that I took at a very similar time and created a multi-layered photo that still has the raw data at the bottom that's all still totally non-destructive. It's crazy powerful what you can do with this new system. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second, take a couple questions, and I'm going to show you another example of what you can do with layers. So, Michael, do we have any questions out there?
Yeah, Dan, there are a few questions if you're if you're ready to take them.
Sure.
First question we have from Ron here is the keyword list exportable at this time?
So the keyword list, we'll show you where the keyword list is here in a minute. Currently, it is not exportable or importable. That is something that we will be adding in the future as part of a free update.
And then also there's a question from Jose that kind of touches on everything you've been doing. How do you save what you're working on while you're working on it? Is there a button I need to click or anything like that?
So basically, because it's all non-destructive, all of the edits are stored as instructions. It's actually saved automatically every time you make any adjustment. So you make any brushstroke, you move any slider, it's automatically saved all the time. So there's no need to save it. There's no don't do that either. So basically every time you make an adjustment, you've updated that file that's saved. You can always reset it. You can see there's the reset options to reset the settings or to reset the entire layer down here at the bottom. When I'm done with it, I can go back to browse or change photos. It's going to now take those instructions and it's going to bundle them together into what we call an ON photo. An ON photo is kind of our proprietary raw format. It's going to save the raw data from both of those along with all of the masks and all the instructions. That way it's portable. It can go from one computer to another one. And then, of course, at the end of the day, because it's non-destructive, if you want to share it with somebody else, you would export it. And you can export it to all the common formats, TIFF, JPEG. You can also export it to a PSD that actually maintains the layers. And if you do masks on the layers, like I did a layer mask for the building, that actually gets saved into a layer PSD file. So you could take it to Photoshop and continue to work on it there if you wanted to, or if you need to share it with a friend who uses Photoshop.
Awesome, thanks. And there are a couple other questions in here that I'm going to be responding to directly, or your next question break, they'll probably be more in line with what you're talking about. So why don't you keep going? And if you do have questions, feel free to throw them into that Q&A module, and I will pass them up to Dan as they come through.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to open up another photo here. I want to show you one of the really cool things you can do in layers that actually solves for me one of the problems I've had in the past. I like to use textures a lot. One of the things with textures is a lot of textures come with color. And sometimes I like the color, but I might not like the actual detail of the texture. And if I was to paint away the texture, I'd lose the color as well. Let me show you. I'm going to take this photo. Let's go into Effects. I'm going to add the texturizer filter here. And let's go grab something that has a heavy color to it. Like I really love this one right here, the warm concrete. I'm going to grab that. Let me turn the opacity up. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So you notice how it's added this great rich warm color to it. And I like the texture on the brick, but I don't like it on her skin. Let me pan up here so you can see a little bit better. You can see how it's put this texture on her skin. Well, if I was to use a masking tool to paint that away, if I was to open up the mask and grab the masking brush and I try to paint that away, I lose all the color, right? All right, so let me show you how you can make this work better for you today. I'm just going to delete this filter. Rather than using as a filter in Effects, I'm just going to add it as a layer instead. So all those same textures, all those same borders that you can add in Effects, you can also add as layers independently. So I'm just going to click on the Add button again here. I'm going to go to my Extras. Instead of going to the skies, I'm going to go to the Textures, and that was what, paper I think it was, or walls. And there's that same texture that I was using as a texture. I'm just going to add it as a layer on top of my photo here. Let's go back to a fit view so you can see this. I'll select the move tool. I'll fill my canvas with it. and then change the blending mode. That blending mode is really what converts it into a texture. So I've access to all those blending modes. I can preview them live. Let's go through and pick one that we like. There's overlay. That's a good one to use. And now we zoom back in on our photo here a little bit. Zoom in one more time so it's a little easier to see. There's that same texture applied. Now to get rid of it, I can actually blur selectively that layer. So on that warm concrete texture, I'm just going to add a blur filter to that. I can just use the regular blur, probably even at the default settings. You can see how that left the color that pulled off the texture. I will invert its mask, and now I can just paint the blur in just where I want, just on the texture. Alrighty? Hope everybody followed that. If I need to explain that again, I'm happy to, Michael. So now, let's make sure I'm set to paint in rather than paint out. And I can just paint. And you can see how I'm painting away the texture, but I'm keeping the color from the texture. So I can really isolate it just where I want. So I can get all that great texture on the wall, but I can paint it off of her. And I could even paint it a different opacity if I wanted to. So I could only paint it off the areas that I was concerned about or blend it in a more natural way. So that's yet another cool thing that you can do with layers. And it solves for me what was a problem I used to have to deal with all the time. All right, you know, while we're here, let's show you the new text tool. So over here, you noticed in the tool well, there's a text tool now. So you can add text to your photos non-destructively as well. There's a lot of uses for this. You can use it for artistic use if I'm creating a postcard, for example, or a Christmas card, I can do that. It's also great for just putting your watermark on a photo. If you just want to put your name in the corner, maybe you need to add an annotation. There's lots of things you can use text for. It's one of the most requested tools that we've had for quite a while. So to add text, just click on the text tool. It's going to pop in a text box for you automatically. It's going to remember your previous size and font for you. It's sticky, is what we call it when it does that. And now I can just put in some text in here. I'm going to say, gold is best. There we go. And it applies into a text box. I can move that box around. I can size and position that box where I want it. I could change the color of the text. Let's say I actually want to use a gold color. So I'll click on the color picker right here. I'll use a little built-in dropper tool. Let's go grab kind of a gold color out of her hair. Something like that. There we go. And I can change its opacity as well. So if I want to use a different opacity, I can just tug that opacity slider down and create a more subtle look. And you can create as many of those text boxes as you want. You can click the add button and add another text box if I wanted to. So I could use it to do multiple things in different fonts, different opacities, different sizes, you name it. The other cool thing is you can save a preset with that text. Just like you'd save a preset for anything else, like you could save a preset for effects, I could come up to the settings menu. I could save it as a preset and turn on just the text tool. So I can actually apply text in a preset. So I can apply the same text in the same relative spot on a whole batch of photos. So you can make a preset that you use for exporting that's your name or your watermark. So a really handy tool to have. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second because I covered a couple cool things there, Michael. Let's see if we have any questions on those before I move on.
Yeah, Dan, there's a couple questions about how the layers are kept on the OS level. And I know you kind of talked about that a little bit, but if you could maybe touch on that a little bit more. There's a couple people asking just about layers and then PSD files and how those kind of work from and to ON1 Photo RAW 2019.
Sure. So when you create a layered file in Photo RAW, it has to save it in our ON Photo format. That's the same format that we use for HDR, the same format that we use for focus stacking. We'll show you guys that here in a minute as well. It allows us to encapsulate all of the raw data into a single file. We have to remember a lot of users work on multiple computers, so they want to be able to work on it on computer A and be able to then reuse it on computer B, or if they work in a studio environment, it needs to be shareable. So we can't store a layered file simply as instructions because it would be really easy to misplace one of those photos and you'd end up breaking your work. So by combining them together into one new file, you have everything you need for it to be portable. Now that ON Photo format, like I said, it encapsulates the actual raw data from all of the photos that you add as layers. And then you'll see those layers here inside of the layers pane. That's proprietary to us, so you'd be able to view that inside of Photo RAW. If you want to export it, you can export it as a flattened TIFF or JPEG format or PNG, or you could also export it as a layered Photoshop format file as well, which will render any effects that you've applied to the layers, but maintain the layers, their position, their opacity, their blend modes, so that those can then be re-edited inside of Photoshop. Now, if you work through Photoshop as a plugin, you would be doing all of your layered work inside of Photoshop instead, so you wouldn't be dealing with layers here. And you can also open up existing layered Photoshop files as long as they're simple layers with simple options like blending modes and layer opacities. If you've done things like text inside of Photoshop, or you've created smart objects inside of Photoshop, those are things that we don't understand. But your normal average Photoshop format file, you can open up and manipulate the layers here and save it out with those same layers. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that covered it. If not, please just ask another question in the Q&A and we can obviously cover that some more. There is another question here from George. He says, I have moved from Lightroom with this edition, and one problem for me is how to import. Is this through ON1 or is this direct to folders? So maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
So when we say import, I assume we're talking, that's kind of a loaded term. That can mean a lot of different things. So if you're coming from Lightroom, you can use the Lightroom Migration Assistant. I'll kind of show you guys that here at the end. That actually helps you take all of your photos, all of your settings, all of your keywords, all of your collections, everything you've done in Lightroom, and move it over to Photo RAW kind of all in a single step so that everything is still there, everything is non-destructive. So that's one way to do it. You kind of think of that as importing. Another thing that we could think of as importing, let me jump back to browse here so I can show you, is to just simply browse. You have to keep in mind that at its heart, Photo RAW is a browser. You don't actually have to import anything into a database before you can work on it. You can just go to wherever it lives on disk. So when we jump back to browse, when this file gets done saving, you'll actually see all of your hard drives that are on your computer, and you can just simply browse to them. So over here, let me just roll these folders up here. Right here in the local drive section, you can see the two hard drives. One's in my computer, one's attached, and I can roll these guys down and I can see all of their contents. I can browse them just like I would in a browser. I can also create what we call a catalog folder where we keep an eye on folders in the background for you automatically. So as you add new photos or the photos change, everything stays up to date. Makes it a little bit faster to browse, makes it easier to search if you make catalog folders. So I keep all my photos in the same folder structure. So I just say, hey, make it a catalog folder, keep an eye on it, and then everything's up to date. I never have any missing photos that way. The other meaning of import, there's at least 3 of them that I can think of, is how do I get my pictures off of a memory card? And if I want to get my pictures off of a memory card, you would actually go up to the File menu and select Import. And that'll open up a dialog that helps you download from your camera or from your phone, let you pick where they're going to go and control everything. So I'm going to hit Import. I don't have a camera attached, so it's not going to show any photos here in the middle right now. But you would see thumbnails for all of your photos. You can pick where they're going to go, what metadata and renaming options you want to apply to them, and it'll do that for you automatically. All right, cool. So that was kind of important. Let me move on, and we're going to talk about a couple of the other cool features that are in here. So we showed you how to kind of manually build a layered file by opening one photo and then inserting others as a layer. That's a really common way to do it because oftentimes you're only dealing with 2 or 3 photos at a time. Sometimes you're dealing with a larger group of photos, and we give you some tools to help out with that. Common scenarios for things like that would be doing HDR or panorama or focus stacking, which I'll show you, but sometimes you also have an action sequence that you want to combine together. So here I've got an action sequence of 4 photos. Let's take a look at these here so you can see them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll notice that the background moves a little bit. I was hand holding the camera when I shot these. So if I wanted to combine these together, I need to align them. So in the old days, I would have to reduce their opacity and use the move tool and kind of manually futz with them around to get them all aligned up. It's a lot easier now. Now I can just click right here on the layers button. That will open all 4 of those as one new layered photo. So watch, this will stack those files together as one new on photo. We watch our layer stack. You can see each layer as it comes in. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's those 4 layers that we have, and then I can now automatically align them together. So I can go up to the layers menu and select align visible layers, and this will now take those 4, find what's common between them, in this case the trees and the mountain, and we'll align them all up. So now if I turn these layers off, you'll see how the mountain doesn't move. The only thing that really moves is just the snowboarder. Oops, I want to turn the bottom one off. See how it all stays nice and aligned, just like that. All right, so that's the align layers feature. And you can use that for lots of different things. In this case, I would use it to mask and combine this to create 4 different copies of the snowboarder. There's lots of video tutorials on our website where you can see that happen in action. You can also use it to combine multiple exposures together. If you're not interested in doing HDR, if you really just have a foreground and a background and you want to combine them together, it's a great way to align them and save you some trouble in doing that. All right, so I've mentioned focus stacking a couple of times. Let's go take a look at focus stacking here. Let me go back to browse so I can find the photos we want to work on. And in here, I happen to have a sequence of 14 photos that were all shot at the same time that have a different focus depth in the photo. So you notice in this one, it's in focus in the foreground, out of focus in the background. And as I move through these photos, you notice how the focus moves from the front to the back. And you also notice how in the process of doing that, the subject actually gets a little bit smaller as the focus moves. That's just kind of the way lenses work. As you change the focus, the subject matter is going to change in size a little bit. Oops, went a little too far there. So I'm going to grab all, I think it's 14 of these guys. Yeah, 14 of these photos. And I'll click on the focus button. This will take these photos, it will align them, scale them so they all match exactly the same, and then it'll pick the sharpest part of each of those photos and combine it together into one hyper-focused photo. It's pretty crazy that it can do that. The other cool thing that it can do is it actually lets you control your depth of field after the fact. So it's the only tool like it of its kind. Let me show you how it works here in just a second. It's got to open up 14 big CR2 photos, so it takes a second here. There we go. Let me move this over. So down here at the bottom, you'll see a list of all of the photos. So there's actually all 14 of those photos. I could turn photos on or off. So if it's not actually contributing to the results, I could turn it off. They're also ordered based on their focus distance. So you can see that this one was focused the closest. And if I get all the way to the end, these are focused the furthest away. And then right here is that depth of field slider. It has two handles on it, one on the left, one on the right. And I can really dial in just the depth of field that I want. So let's say I want to blur the foreground a little bit. I can grab the close focus slider, that's the one on the left, and I can bring that in. And as I do that, it's going to reduce the focus in the foreground. And if I want to do the same thing with the background, let me move this slider back out so you can see it. If I bring the right one in, it's going to reduce the focus in the background. I could even pick just a narrow focus. I could actually pick the exact slice of focus that I want by bringing those two sliders in together like that. It's very powerful. It's all done in real time inside of the GPU due to the power of modern GPUs. There's also a handy slider over here called despeckle. When we combine those photos together in the areas where there's not a lot of detail, something that stays all the way out of focus, sometimes it has a hard time picking which pixel is the sharpest in that area. So you might get some speckles. That despeckle slider will clean that up so you don't see that anymore. Now, you may have noticed when I opened up that focus stacking dialog that there was a little alert that says, we're still working on this. With most photos like this one, it's done a great job. There's some other cases, things like moving water or where there's a lot of things that are out of focus that never become in focus in your photo, where we're not doing as good a job as we want. We're working on improvements for that right now. You'll see that in a free update coming very soon, where you'll get much better results. The other thing that you'll get is the option to output as layers with masks. So today, it just outputs as one single layer with the best results. But in the future, you'll actually be able to have all 14 of those layers, each layer with a layer mask, so that you can then go in and manipulate it on your own. So a more powerful option. Plus, you'll also be able to zoom and pan in that preview window as well. All right, so I talked about a couple things there. Let's pause again and answer a couple questions, Michael.
Yeah, so there are quite a bit of questions in here. So before I jump into those, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted to our blog, our Facebook, our YouTube channel after the webinar has ended. So there's a few of you asking that. Just know that we'll get that up as soon as possible out after this. And so there are a couple questions on quick mask and color fill and how you do that in RAW 2019. Yeah.
We can definitely talk about those. So for quick mask, the quick mask tool, like I mentioned at the beginning, is actually being replaced by a brand new AI-based quick selection tool. It will be faster and a lot more accurate. It really has to be redone in the non-destructive world. We're working on that right now. It'll be coming as part of a free update very soon. The other masking tool that you might have used in the past is the line mask tool that was also available in layers. That's one we're going to add. You're probably not going to see that until later in the year, but the line mask tool will come back as well. Another question was around color fill layers. So that was a feature that was in the old layers module. And that was kind of there because in the old layers world, we were really trying to mimic Photoshop and the way Photoshop did things. Well, there are so many better ways to accomplish what you would do with a color fill layer. So let me show you. There's kind of two reasons that you'd use a color fill layer. One is you want to change the color of an object. So if I took a photo like this, let me open it up here. If I wanted to change this leaf from orange to green, I can do that with a local adjustment. So rather than adding an entire color fill layer and then having to mask it away just where I want, I can add a local adjustment and use the paint with color option. And with Paint with Color, I can paint that color in wherever I want to change it. So let's grab a green color. You know, actually, I'm just going to pick a green out of this leaf that's next to it. It's more of a brown than a green. Pick a little more vivid green. There we go. And then I can paint this in. Let me turn the perfect brush on and make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to add a little bit more feather to it so it's a little softer on the edge. And now I can paint that in. Now, there's a couple different modes for this. Right now, it's set to paint a solid color. That's just going to paint just like it would with a color fill layer. I'm going to change it to either the classic or the replace color option. I'm going to use replace color for this case. And see, I can now paint that in, and that lets me change the color of an object. So if I need to change the color of a piece of apparel or something like that, this is an easy way to do it with that color fill layer. Now, the other time that you might want to use a color fill layer is if you're trying to do more of a design. You want to doing like a Christmas card, for example. And in that case, I want to have a completely solid color layer that I'm using to put other photos on top of. And you can still do that as well. Just change your blend mode of that color fill layer to solid paint, and then just set the mask so that it's reset to white. So it'll be like that. Now you've got a solid green fill layer. So you could then put other layers on top of it to do that. If you're using color fill layers to go to black and white, that's a horrible way to do it. There's far better ways using the black and white filter in effects. You have much more control in everything you need to make great looking black and white. Whereas with a color fill layer, you don't have any control over what you get out of it. So anyway, there's my, my diatribe on color fill layers. Let's move on, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit about the new portrait tab. Let's grab a portrait photo. I'm going to click on Edit, and we'll click over here on the Portrait tab. Before we do that, I think I'm going to optimize this photo just a little bit. It's pretty dark out of the camera. I'm going to hold down my J key. Let's grab that exposure slider. I want to adjust it so that I'm not really blowing anything out other than just the pure specular highlight of the sun. I can then check my blacks, make sure I've got a little bit of real black in there. I only want just a tiny little bit. And then let's grab that midtones slider and open it up a little bit in the foreground. Maybe bring the highlights down a skosh. There we go. All right, now let's jump over to Portrait. The Portrait tab will go through it. It will automatically detect all of the faces in your photo automatically. So you can see right up here, there's one face, two faces, and it's going to pick the biggest face, and it's going to add a filter for it automatically. Now I can go to work on this. This will help me to smooth out the skin and enhance the eyes and mouth all for me automatically. Let me zoom in so we can take a little closer look at what's going on here. Let me pan over to her, and I'm going to start by turning on the skin retouching. When I enable that, it's going to find her skin, it's going to smooth out blemishes, it's going to add a powder coating, kind of a smoothing to the skin. I can also reduce the shine and even control the range of those adjustments. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to bring my blemishes up a bit and my smoothing up a little bit. The range slider is really handy. This actually lets me preview the color range that it's using. So I can dial in just where I want that applied. I'm going to turn it up pretty high for her. And let's add some eyes to it now. So I click on the eye tool, click on the eyes, and it's now going to add an overlay, which lets me define the region of the eyes. The area that's in the eye is going to allow me to brighten and whiten it, and also to increase the color and the sharpness in there for increasing the iris. So there we go. Let's bring the whitening up in the eyes a little bit. So you can see, if you have very, very dark eyes, I can brighten those up substantially so I can actually see some of the whites in the eyes. Same thing for the mouth. If I want to add the mouth, I just click on the corners of her mouth with the mouth tool. Just align the overlays with the edge of the lips and the edge of the teeth. Just like that. And now I could increase the whitening and brightening in her teeth. Let me turn that on and off so you guys can see. There's no adjustment, and there's after adjustment. I didn't have to use any brushing or do any refining to do this. This is all done automatically. Now, if I want to go work on him, I just click on his face. It will automatically add a filter for him, and now I'm going to work on his face. Let's pan over and take a look at him. I'm going to turn on that skin smoothing. I'm going to have high blemishes, low smoothing for him because I don't like a lot of smoothing for gentlemen. Let's add his eyes in, same way. Bring up the whitening. We'll brighten up the iris, brighten up the sclera of the eye, add the mouth in there. Oops, move this little guy out of my way. There we go. And I can increase the whitening on his teeth too. Let's go back and take a look at the overall photo. So there's before and after. We took a photo that out of the camera we probably wouldn't have kept, and we actually were able to, through the power of it being a raw photo, lighten up the foreground, retouch the skin, eyes, teeth, all in one shot. So very powerful adjustments that you have now inside of layers. All right, I'm gonna jump over. I wanna show you guys some of the improvements we've made with the local tab. The local adjustments, I showed you a little bit how you can paint with color with it, but it's a super duper powerful tool now. It now actually uses the full raw data in the photo, so you can do really dramatic adjustments with it. I'm gonna grab a landscape scene right here. Let me open this up. We'll go to develop, and I want to brighten up the foreground in this. So let's hold down the J key on our keyboard. I'm looking to come in here and brighten up the foreground a little bit. So I'm gonna increase my exposure. I'm going to bring up those shadows. I'm gonna bring down my blacks so I can have a little bit of contrast in there. Bring my structure up a bit so it really is nice and velvety in the water. So great, the foreground's looking pretty good, but the problem is I've lost everything in the sky. So I'll come over to my local adjustments tool. I'm going to switch from the brush to the gradient. I'm just gonna click right here in the sky. That adds the gradient mask. That gradient mask lets me pick just where I want to apply this adjustment, and the feather lines let me control how quickly it's gonna change. So I'm gonna position this right about here. And now watch, I can grab that exposure slider and I still have all that full raw data sitting underneath. So even though it looked like it was completely overexposed, I have everything that's in that raw file. I can bring that exposure back down. I can adjust the temperature. Let's warm it up a little bit. Let's use the haze slider. The haze slider is kind of my secret cloud weapon to bring back some additional detail in there. And you can see how with that local adjustment, by having so much power in there, I can really come in and bring back all the data. I could even name this. If I added multiple adjustments and I need to keep track of what they are, I can just double click and I can name these as well. So I could say this is my sky layer. If I added another one to work on another part of the photo, I could give it a name as well. All right, a couple things in the initial version. If you had the pre-release version or you were over installing over a previous version, you might end up with these buttons not working, or you might end up with double here in this style drawer. That's an issue that we're fixing. That'll be fixed in the next release. Just use the ones in this pop-up list. They will all continue to work. All right, let's see if we got any questions out there, Michael.
Yeah, there's a couple one-off questions if you are ready to take some of those.
Yeah, we can take a couple. Then I've got like two more things I want to show everybody before we get done, though.
Okay, well, this is kind of a general question I'll start you off with, kind of a softball. What's the difference between using a local adjustment and using a full adjustment from effects and masking it out?
So that is a great question. And in many cases, there's not going to be a huge difference between them. So technically speaking, the local adjustments are done before the adjustments and effects. So they actually have more of the raw data to work with. As you continue to add more adjustments on top of the photo, the range gets kind of smaller and you only have what the results of the previous thing you did were. So you have more range and probably a little bit more control with the local adjustments. So I tend to use those a lot. And the only time that I'm going to go and do things in effects are the things that are really unique to effects. So things like blurs, glows, textures, borders, dynamic contrast, that's all that stuff that lives in effects. It only lives there. That's where I would use that. But if I'm simply just trying to paint in a tonal adjustment, I would do it with the local adjustments rather than with the tone enhancer, for example.
Awesome, good stuff. And let's see here. There's one more I'll throw your way until you move on. If I want to use a watermark with an image with it, can I still create a text preset for the watermark? I think what they're asking is if they make a text layer, can I save that as a preset for a watermark?
Yes, you definitely can do that. So get your text set where you want. So you type out exactly what you want, the font, the size, and the color you want, and let's say you put it in the bottom right-hand corner at 70% opacity. Save that as a preset, and then you can then add that on to any photo, and it'll just put it in the same spot, same settings for you. So it makes it very quick to do that. Now, there's also a watermark pane in export. That's an image-based watermark. So if you have a logo, that'll help you to add in a logo instead. But if you just have a text-based watermark, I would actually use the text tool with a preset instead.
Awesome. Perfect, Dan. So there's a couple more questions, but why don't you go ahead and keep going through, and we'll get to these here at the end.
Yeah. let me show you a couple other things that are new. One of the other things that are new is there's some new filters in effect. So I just wanted to show those to you real quick. I'm going to grab a photo. Let's jump over to edit this guy. I want to use the develop tab just very quickly to do my normal image optimizations. I just want to make sure I've got all of my highlight detail. I want to make sure I've got a little bit of true blacks in here. This is kind of the same thing I do when I work on every photo, this base optimization to make it look good. There we go. Now I'm going to pop over to effects. And in effects, there's actually 3 new filters. So the first one is film grain. So there's a new film grain filter. This allows you to add film grain to color and black and white photos. Of course, there's film grain built into the black and white filter as well. The ones I wanted to show you are the curves filter that is new and the color adjustment filter. Now, these technologies have been in effects, but they've been built into other filters. So you had to use them with a lot of other stuff at the same time. So we kind of broke them out into individual tools, making them easier to use. So color adjustment is one of my favorites. This allows you to target an individual color range and then adjust its color, basically its hue, what color it is, its saturation, and its brightness. So let's say I want to darken the blues in the sky. I can simply grab the blue color range. I can click on it right here, and then I can make adjustments. I can also use the targeted color tool. This is really handy as well. With the targeted color tool, I'm going to set it to adjust saturation. When I click this, whatever color I click on, it's going to pick the right color range, and then just by dragging to the right, it's going to increase the saturation, or dragging to the left is going to decrease it. So I can just simply click on colors to adjust them. So I want to increase the blues. I want to grab the yellows, and I want to increase the saturation of those yellows too. So I can bring those yellows, make them pop. And now maybe I want to shift the green colors a little bit. So rather than using saturation, I'm going to switch this to hue, and then I'll just click on the green colors, and now I can shift the color of the greens around. I can make them more fall, or I could make them more of a vivid green color. That's probably a little crazy. Let's go the fall direction here. There we go, just like that. So it makes it very quick to interact with different color ranges and adjust them using that color adjustment tool. The other one that's really handy in here is the curves tool. So there are books written on curves. Curves is one of the oldest adjustments when it comes to digital imaging. It's really powerful. It also can be kind of scary as well. I'm going to show you 2 techniques very quickly that I happen to use for curves. One is kind of what I call the muddy matte look. All you do is open up the curves, grab the bottom, the black point here. If I move this up the left-hand side, it's going to create that matte look. The problem is when you create a matte look, you also lose all the blacks, all the contrast with it. If I grab that point and I move it to the right, it's going to make it really dark and contrasty. It's plugging up the shadows. What I really want is the best of both worlds. So go halfway in between, and I can actually create kind of a muddy matte look. It's probably not the best photo for, but for more of a lifestyle photo, anything in the city, this is a really popular look right now. It's also very popular with portrait and weddings. So you still have the appearance of black, but the blacks are not totally black. And you just adjust how strong that is just by moving this black point up or down the scale. The other thing that's really handy in here is if you are going through your old shoebox of photos and you have a lot of negatives, you can use the curves to invert it. So you can take a negative and make it a positive. There's a built-in style for this right in here. Just grab the invert option, and that will invert it, make a positive a negative or a negative a positive. All right, there's some of those new improvements. Let's jump back to browse real quick. And I did want to mention the master keyword list. We talked about it earlier. It lives right over here in browse on the right-hand side, and it will show every keyword that it has ever seen. So any photo that's in the catalog photo, any photo you've ever browsed will get added to this list. You can then search easily. You can also edit and delete keywords that you no longer use. So let's say I found out that I was shooting at Reed College and I spelled Reed wrong. I thought it was R-E-I-D. So I can come up here, I can type in R-E-I-D, and it'll go out and find Reed College. And if I double click on it, it will go find all of my photos that I have that keyword assigned to it. So I'm just going to double click. There it goes. It goes out and finds 54 photos where I spelled it wrong. Now to fix it, I can right click on that. I can edit the keyword. Now I can spell it correctly with 2 E's instead of E-I-D. And now it will go through and correct all of those photos keywords. So this corrects them in the database, and it will also go through and updates all of their sidecar files with them as well. You can also delete keywords here. Soon you'll be able to import a keyword list or export a keyword list for controlled vocabularies, and we'll also be able to have nested keywords so you can group things into a hierarchy. Whew, that's a lot of new stuff in 2019. A couple other things. We now support HEIC files, the HEIC. So if you're shooting with an iPhone, there's probably some other phones that capture in this new format as well. Those can be downloaded and browsed. You can browse Canon CR3 files. That's the new RAW format from the R series cameras. I think a couple of the M series used it as well. You can download them, you can browse them, you can change the metadata, you can get a preview of it. You can't edit them yet, unfortunately. That is something we're still working on. It is a very different, very difficult format, and we're working hard to add support for that. I don't have a timeline for when we'll be able to add support for CR3 yet. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people are interested in that new R series camera. Trust me, we're working on it. The other thing, it's actually been there since the previous release, but a lot of people don't know it, is you can actually view and manage your video files inside of Browse as well. So any M4V, MOV files, WAV files, you can view, manage, and open those into another application. So, all right, lots of goodies. Oh, let me show you guys one more thing here real quick. I'm gonna take a couple questions, and let me show you guys how you would actually do the Lightroom migration here. So let me ask a couple questions here while I launch Lightroom. Anybody have questions out there we can answer, Michael?
Yeah, this is probably a good time for some of the one-off questions while you're waiting for that. So a question here from Harvey a while back was, I use ON1 sidecars so that when I back up my photos, my edits are also backed up. Are keywords kept in the sidecars or directly in the photo? If not, where are they stored? And I'll let you take the floor from there.
Keywords get stored in two places. So they get stored in the local database on the computer. They also get stored into the sidecar file. And actually a third place, they also get written to an XMP sidecar file. So a lot of your photos, you'll actually see two sidecar files. The XMP one allows for interchange with other formats that support XMP. So if you were to add keywords to it and then you wanted to go look at it inside of Bridge or Lightroom or any of the Adobe products that support XMP, you would see all the metadata that you've added to those photos. And then also in the ON1 sidecar file, that's our sidecar, we keep those same keywords plus all of your editing instructions for the photo in that one.
Awesome. And then there was a question as well. Let me just scroll up here and try and find it. About the focus stacking. Is there going to be an increase to the 14 image limit?
At this point, it's not planned, but that said, everything we do is based on feedback from users. In order to get that fast speed and the ability to adjust the depth of field, that work has to be done in the video card. And 14 is the maximum that we can put into a modern day video card and do that. So if we added support for more than 14, you would lose those capabilities on anything over 14. So, but that's something we can look at if we get feedback from enough people. We've talked to a lot of folks and we've only talked to a few who need more, and it tends to be for more scientific applications like microscopy or astrophotography, which isn't really our core mission. Our core mission is really around traditional photography.
And will it preserve existing XMP files?
Yep, it'll actually see the existing XMP file, bring in whatever metadata is in that XMP file, and as you make changes to the metadata, it will update that XMP file as well.
Awesome. Well, why don't you go ahead and show us what you were going to show us here if you're ready.
Let me turn the sharing back on here, and I'll guys kind of walk you through how that Lightroom migration process works. So when you install Photo RAW, it'll automatically install the plugins for Lightroom as well, and you access those from the File, Plugin Extras menu, and you can see they live right down here. I could send a photo to the individual modules like Develop or Effects or Portrait or Resize. I could also have a selection of photos in Lightroom, and I could stack them together into one new on photo format if I wanted to combine them. The one that we're interested in is this first one right here, the Migrate Catalog to ON1 Photo. When I select that, it's going to walk you through the process. So a couple notes on this. You need to make sure your Lightroom catalog is in good shape. So you want to attach any of your drives, and you want to click the sync button to make sure everything's up to date. So you don't have any photos missing, you don't have any bad metadata. That's kind of the first step. The second step is it's not a very fast process. It has to do a lot of work in Lightroom. Lightroom has to go through and export each of your photos. If you've got 100,000 photos it has to export, that's going to take a long time. There's a knowledge base article which actually goes into detail about how long an export will take, depending on the number of photos you have, and also how much hard drive space you're going to need. It creates some temporary files that are used for that migration process. They get deleted, but you need to have a sizable amount of space open on your main hard drive for that to work. There's details on how to do that as well. So as I move through these, it'll kind of explain that stuff that I just talked about here of how it works. Then on the next tab, I can choose what I want to migrate. It's automatically going to migrate all your files and folders. That's its core mission. You can also migrate your collections. So any normal collections and collection sets will be migrated over. Smart collections don't get migrated over at this time. You can also migrate your develop settings. That's really what's new in 2019. That's the exciting part. is we use a very powerful AI-based algorithm to actually match the visual results from Lightroom into Photo RAW in a non-destructive way. So if you took a photo into the develop module in Lightroom and you cropped it and rotated it and used the retouch tool and did the stuff in the tone and color pane and did some local adjustments and some retouching, all of that comes over all non-destructively. You can continue to edit it and it'll look very much the same. On a normal RAW photo, the match is quite good. If it's a photo that's really underexposed or really off color or is an older or odd format, it'll still be in the ballpark. It's not going to be as close a match depending on the photo that you're working with. Yeah, and then on the copies tab, you can also have it create copies in either a TIFF or a JPEG with the settings burned in. Not too many people need to use this anymore. Most people want to bring those settings over non-destructively rather than having a cooked version of them instead. You click the migrate button, and it's going to go through that process. It's kind of a two-step process. First is the Lightroom half. That's the part that's going to take the longest. Lightroom has to go through, take all of the photos that you've edited. Keep in mind, it's only going to have to make the exports for the ones you've edited. So any photos you haven't done anything to, those just come across directly very easily. All the ones you've made edits to, it's going to basically create a guide version for us. It's going to make a small JPEG so that we know what it's supposed to look like from Lightroom. We then, using that AI algorithm, look at that photo and we come up with the matching settings inside of Photo RAW. Now, the slider values are not going to be exactly the same. It's a completely different RAW engine, different algorithms, they work a different way. But visually, they're going to match. That's the important part. You want it to look the same, right? Once those photos are exported from Lightroom, all the metadata and all the collections come over to Photo RAW, and then in the background, Photo RAW will go through and it does that matching process. And that takes a couple seconds on every photo. It's all done in the background. You don't have to do anything. If you take a photo and you open it up into the edit module, that conversion happens right away and you'll see what it looks like. So temporarily inside of Photo RAW, you might see a little LR badge on a photo. That means it has Lightroom settings, but we haven't interpreted them yet. We haven't matched them visually yet. So that would be the last step of the process. All right. Whew. That was a lot of fast talking. Any questions, Michael?
Good job, Dan. Yeah, so there's a couple one-off questions. So I'm going to save these for the end. If you're
this is the
ready.
end.
All right, cool. If
I'll
you're ready to take
all questions, all comers. So.
All right. So the first one I'll start you out with here is it's about translated keywords. If I were to enter the keyword house-casa-mason as one keyword, can I look for just house and find that keyword, or do I have to absolutely search for the full keyword? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I would actually have to do a test. I am not sure. I believe the keyword search string is a begins with string rather than a contains string. So you'd have to start with whatever the beginning of the keyword was to find it. But I would actually have to test that. I'm not 100% sure how that works. It might be contains. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I'm sure that helped a little bit. There's a question from Izzy and a few others here that I've dismissed a little bit, but can you save a file as a DNG file from ON1 Photo RAW 2019?
No, that is not something that we have done. In order for us to save into a DNG, we use Adobe's DNG library. That's what we have to use to interpret them and open them. It is not the fastest thing in the world to save photos with. And it's really just perpetuating another proprietary RAW format. So we would prefer to actually keep things in their native format, or if it needs to be saved into a complex one with multiple layers, we save it into our format, the ON Photo instead.
All right, awesome. And let me scroll up here. Since the original image is a layer, is it saved in ON1 format as well? And if so, does that make the size larger like Photoshop and Lightroom does? Which I think you might have covered that already, but just to be safe, I saved that one there.
Yeah, if the original photo doesn't have anything more than its base layer, if it's a normal RAW photo, normal JPEG, you don't add any photos to it, nothing happens. The original photo is untouched. Everything is stored as instructions. As soon as you add another layer to it, or if you open an existing file, an existing PSD that has layers in it, we then will save that into an ON Photo format, which basically encapsulates the raw data. So it will be larger. It'll be smaller than a PSD because it doesn't have to store as much data as a Photoshop format does, but it will be certainly larger than just the individual raw format would be.
Awesome. Is there a way to create custom data fields?
No, there is not at this time.
All right. And this is kind of a two-part question here. So first part of the question is, what about adjustments that come from Aperture, Mac Photos, Luminar, and Aurora, and other applications?
Yeah. So there's a lot of other applications out there for editing your photos. For us, Lightroom is the kind of the biggest one that the most people use. So that's why we built this migration tool for doing that. At this point, if you're using those other systems, you would end up making the choice of either exporting them with their settings burned in, or you would end up exporting them without any of your adjustments, and then being able to then browse wherever you export them to with this. One of the nice things that Adobe does is they have a very flexible, what's called an application programming interface that lets us talk to Lightroom and control Lightroom to be able to actually do the work we need to do to be able to migrate that. Those other platforms don't offer that, so we don't really have a way to automate it so that we can give you the correct results out of it in a non-destructive way.
Awesome. I think that helps. And then the second part of the question would be, how do I get my Apple Photos library or Aperture library visible in ON1 Photo RAW?
So we don't import it automatically. It's something where you would have to export those photos out of those applications to another location and then browse to that location. So there's no automatic importing of those other libraries.
All right. There are a few other questions, but we are getting pretty strapped for time here. I'm going to send one more your way, and then if there is a question I didn't get to, I'm going to send my email out to you guys, so you can just send me a note if you want further info on that. But last question, let me get back to that. Can I use ON1 as my main program and other applications as a plugin to it, such as Luminar or DxO, other applications?
Yes. So let me actually, I'm going to share my screen here so it's a little easier to see how you would do this. So from Browse, and everybody's workflow is a little different. We try to be Switzerland. We try to be as neutral as we can. We still have a lot of our users who actually use us purely as a plugin to Photoshop, and they access the things in the edit module like Photoshop plugins, or people who still use Lightroom for their file management and their raw processing, but they want the cool things you can do in effects or resize. So you can access it as a plugin from those locations. This kind of flips that around. This is, I'm going to use Photo RAW for my browsing and my managing my raw processing, and then I want to send my finished work to another application to do something that Photo RAW maybe doesn't do. Maybe there's an advanced tool in Photoshop that I need to use. So you can simply select any photo here in Browse, right-click, and you notice how it will automatically detect Photoshop and Lightroom, so you can send either the original file or a copy in whatever format and color space you want to another application. And you can use the send to other application to set up whatever other application you want. So if you happen to use mail, let's say I want to email, so I can set up Mail or Outlook as an application, then it will send that photo to my email application to make it easy to submit that way. So, and you can do the same thing with any other image editor, just setting it up as an external editor right there. Okay, what else we got?
Oh, let's see. We're dwindling down to the last little bit here. So can I do the Lightroom conversions after having done it with a previous version?
Yes.
I think they're asking if they can do the Lightroom converter twice.
You can run the Lightroom converter more than once. One thing we will do is, if the photo is in our Photo RAW and already has non-destructive settings applied to it, we will ignore the Lightroom settings and we'll preserve the settings you've put on it. So if you've taken that photo and you've gone in and you've edited that photo in an earlier version, so basically if it's got the little plus minus icon here in the bottom of it, we'll ignore the settings from Lightroom. If you want to make sure you get the settings from Lightroom, just select your photos and hit reset. So you just select the photo, hit reset all. That'll remove your settings from Photo RAW. Then when you run the migration, it'll pick up Lightroom's editing interpretation instead. So now that said, it's not designed for two-way editing. It's not something you want to do all the time. It is a slow process. On a big catalog over 100,000 photos, you're probably going to set it up and let it run overnight, and your results will be done in the morning. But it's not something you're going to wait 15 minutes and have it be done for unless you have very few photos. And if you have multiple catalogs, you open up catalog A, migrate it, open up catalog B, migrate it, and they all get put together into Photo RAW.
All right. Well, while you're talking about catalogs, I have a great question about XMPs then. A question from Richard says, I thought I heard Dan say if I imported the Lightroom catalog that ON1 will update the Lightroom generated XMPs as you change them in ON1?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. Awesome. Glad we could dial that out. And another, to jump on to the plugin question earlier, Judy's asking if it will round trip the photo when you use Luminar as a plugin to ON1 or another application.
Yes. So let me actually go one step back to the previous question, just so that I can be very clear. So XMP files from in the Lightroom world can contain metadata, keywords, descriptions, things like that. It can also contain Lightroom's processing settings in there. So when you bring a photo over, we'll see that XMP file. We'll interpret its keywords and its descriptions and things like that. We ignore the Lightroom settings in that. That actually comes over through the migration plugin. If I make editing changes to it in Photo RAW, Lightroom is not going to see those settings. We don't update Lightroom's XMP file to have Lightroom see the edits that we make. That doesn't really work that way. We wouldn't be able to match things the way Lightroom wants to see it. So just be very clear on that. The other question was, yes, it will round trip. So when you take that file and you say send it to another application like Luminar, you're either going to send the original photo, or you can send the version with our edits to it. When you create that version, it's going to live right next to the original file, and you'll see it back inside of Photo RAW when you're done. So keep in mind, when you do that, you have basically burned in your non-destructive settings into a new file. So the original file is still there. The new file sits next to it that you've done your Luminar settings on. You can't go back and change your Photo RAW settings at that point. You've burned them in.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. And to kind of go out in the left field here, a little different trajectory for you. If I have an HDR set which has alignment issues, should I do the layers alignment first and then use the HDR function, or vice versa?
So the HDR has its own automatic alignment in it. It will detect and align those photos for you automatically. Typically, obviously, when you shoot HDR, tripod is the way to go. You want to be able to try to have them align as best as possible. There's occasions where the alignment algorithm either can't match it because they're too far apart, or it might have an error. There's an alignment button you can turn off. I have had odd cases where even with the alignment turned on, it might not align them correctly. Turning that off, if I shot them on a tripod, might give better results too.
All right, and last question I'll leave you with, and then that's pretty much all we have. Is there a keyboard shortcut item for edit and browse and switching between those modules?
Yes, there definitely is now. So in order to switch between the modules, if you just right-click on a photo, in the contextual menu, see what those are. So if I hit the D key, it'll take me to the Develop tab, S for effects, Y for resize, you can see. And if I want to go back to browse, it's G. So if I took this photo and I hit the D key, it's going to take me into Edit in the Develop tab. And then if I want to go back to browse, I would just hit the G key to go back to browse here. Just like that. Isn't that fun?
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, cool. Well, I thank everybody for coming. I know this was a kind of a long session. We had a rough beginning there. I hope everybody got some value out of it. I hope you're as excited about Photo RAW 2019 as I am. I would like to have a huge thank you to all of our dedicated customers, especially the people who did the alpha and beta testing for us. That really helps us build a better product, getting your feedback. As you guys know, we're not a huge company. There's only about 25 of us. So having more configurations, people trying things in different ways helps us locate those bugs. And we also really appreciate all your feedback. It's your feedback that helps us build better products in the future. You mentioned, you may have noticed there's several things that I told you that's coming very soon. That's all based on the feedback that you guys have given us. And also a big shout out to our dev team here at ON1. They have been working their butts off over the last few months to make sure they get this release out on time for you guys. So big shout out to them. If you like what they're doing, be sure to tell us on Facebook or let those guys know that you appreciate all their hard work. Thanks for watching. This session is recorded. You can watch it again later. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.